Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth.
There is now the infamous example of $20,000 forgivable loans to be given to black entrepreneurs and pathways to support federal marijuana legalization. This was a very small program that didn't deserve as much attention as it got, except for the fact that it made people feel like their struggles weren't acknowledged. Even highly progressive voices agreed that such a program should be based on economic need, not race.
Now that snippet that you just saw came from a channel that has over 1.28 million subscribers. And when you hear me say things like we're up against an organized offense, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Black empowerment is up against an organized offense, and it's not just people who are in the ivory towers of some white media broadcast or print outlet. This guy made an entire video right after the election, and he entitled it, "Yes, People Are Angry." Now, keep the wording he used in mind. He said people are angry. People. That's important because if you're not paying attention, you might be fooled into thinking he's talking about just people in general. But when you watch, you see that people is just a euphemism for white. He made a distinction between black men and people. Keep that in mind for his little gripe. He doesn't even know that he's wrong, just like Scott Jennings on CNN. He looked at a headline and he thought he knew it all too. But even when Jennings repeated the same asinine talking point this guy did, that Kamala Harris had some program that was just for black men, it was Wendell Pierce of all people who in real time exposed this guy, and that Kamala's policy was for everyone.
I wanted to ask you, the policies in that, I mean, effectively, she said, I'm going to give you marijuana, I'm going to give you crypto, and I'm going to give you unconstitutional government bribes. If a white Republican politician had done that, we would be in 24/7.
We got to go, but real disservice.
It was for
marijuana
black men. It was stated
decriminalization.
Yeah, it was stated because black men asked, "What are you going to do for me?" Hold on, Scott.
The idea that those are just
for
black men is, I think, not true.
It's not loans for black men. It's loans for anyone. No, it isn't.
No, it isn't.
She was telling you this will be effective for you too.
For
a
you
policy
also.
that I had already put out a week ago, actually a month ago, that these entrepreneurial loans will be beneficial to you. Just like I tell black folks, it is a black policy. Social Security is a black policy. Medicare is a black policy. It is effective and it impacts your community as much as anyone else's community.
Right,
so
everyone.
it is not identity politics.
Thank you.
It's actually American policy.
Kamala Harris just put black men in the memo that she sent out to her DNC foot soldiers in order to give the intentional misimpression that she was finally addressing black men's concerns. Now, I just came across this guy's channel and understand something. When it comes to people, even those who I disagree with, I try to get some sense of who they are, some feel for who they might be about. And I know that you can't necessarily learn everything about somebody from simply watching one video or one statement. But whoever this guy is, he tries to bill himself as being left of center, at least on a number of social issues, and he tries to come off as if he digs beneath the surface. And yet he was too ignorant and lazy to even ask if what he was saying was even true. And for the record, that Wendell Pierce segment was aired a full month before this guy posted his pathetic little hit piece. So this guy is saying that people, by which he means white people, are angry. What are they angry about? Well, they're angry that somebody actually thinks that black people's concerns and needs ought to be part of the political discourse. He makes a direct connection between the two. Yeah, people are angry. They're angry that black people are being mentioned. And just to put a fine point on it, at the end of the video, he said that men were upset because men were being left behind.
Now, there is one group above all that nobody wants to recognize as falling behind, and that's working-aged men.
Now, of course, when he says men, he means white men like himself, and he doesn't say anything about people being upset at the assertion that white men, who, by the way, have enjoyed the fat of the land for half a millennia, that apparently they got some sort of gripe and think that it's legitimate. Well, that's what turns people off. He doesn't say anything about that. So people are upset that black men were merely being mentioned in what he himself admits is a do-nothing policy that wasn't really worthy of the attention that it was even getting.
This was a very small program that didn't deserve as much attention as it got, except for the fact that it made people feel like their struggles weren't acknowledged.
Would he ever point to anything for white people or white men in specific and then say that people are upset about that? Of course not. Hell, DeSantis and Rufo couldn't have said that any better. This is what I've been telling you about. That there's this hyper-aggressive, organized campaign of lies pushing the racist fraud that black people merely being part of the political discourse cost the Democrats the election. and that we got to double and triple down on making sure that black people, if not being ignored, at the very least are told you better stay in your place. Never mind the fact that 4 years ago, it was black people who were mobilized and in the streets, literally setting the country on fire, might I add. And Democrats not only won that presidential election, they also had a clean sweep of the House and the Senate. So you have some angry white males who are ultra insecure about one election cycle that dared to not make them the center of the universe. And you can forget about that old saying about in vino veritas, which means in wine truth. You get somebody drunk and they'll speak their mind. Nah, not really. If you get somebody angry enough, that's when they'll really speak their mind. That's when their filter breaks down completely. Because if you got somebody who's a drunk, even they can actually hold their liquor to an extent. But when somebody's furious, as far as they're concerned, they lose all inhibitions about what they want to say. So when you got all of these angry white supremacists and white supremacist suspects who are running around, when they're angry about black people actually being mentioned, that's when they say what they've been thinking all along. They separate black from people in general, because in their minds, black people aren't people. And they see white in their minds as being some sort of tabula rasa normalcy. White means citizen. White means human. And black, well, certainly not. Now, again, what this guy was talking his gibberish about black voters were somehow what people had on their minds when they went into the voting booth, that's a lie. If you look at the polls from the 2024 election and specifically look at the exit polls, those are the polls taken right when people are leaving the polling station. What do you see people talking about as being the issues that matter to them most? What were they thinking about during the campaign and after they cast their ballots? And when you look at all those polls, you don't see anyone saying, well, I was thinking about voting for Kamala Harris, but I heard that she had some agenda just for black men, and that was so divisive. That was just so offensive to me. I decided I had to vote for the orange man. You didn't have anyone talking like that. This election was about the same thing that every election is about: the price of groceries, gasoline, and a roof over your head. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have been in the White House for the last 4 years, and people are looking and going, economically, our situation hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. Half the people are not able to find a job that pays a living wage, and the other half of the people can't find a job at all. If you're part of the investor class, the 1% of the 1% who makes their money off of Wall Street, paper profits, something for nothing, then this is the best economy in decades. But if you're not part of that investor class, then this is a horrible economy. And Kamala Harris has been the vice president for all of it. What the heck has she been doing? That's what everybody's been saying. The same thing they said about Trump 4 years ago when COVID threw the entire economy into a tailspin. For 4 years, inflation just got worse and worse. And by the way, Yanis Varoufakis, in the video that I posted on Twitter 4 years ago when he was talking about how Joe Biden wasn't going to do anything for the left, one of the things that he said was that the country, talking about the U.S., was about to go into a major recession. He was able to see that coming before everybody else did. But then again, he is a world-class economist. He would know these things. But the point is, people were asking, what's Kamala Harris going to do about housing? In fact, if she's going to do something, why hasn't she done it for the last 4 years? What's she going to do about inflation? We notice that the cost of groceries hasn't gone down, it's only going up. Don't tell me that the cost of groceries has slowed down its price increase. We need those prices to go down, not slow down. And when Kamala Harris finally gave her last-minute 11th hour pathetic attempt to acknowledge that, yeah, the housing crisis is just as bad as you think it is, and I guess we're not going to be able to get it to go away with a bunch of empty happy talk, when she finally did come up with the admission, it was too dang late. 5 seconds before voting day is not the time to acknowledge that the housing market is in the toilet on your watch. These were the questions people were putting to Kamala Harris. This is what they were thinking about before the election and while they were in the voting booth. They were putting hard questions to her about what the hell's been going on economically with the country for the last 4 years and why things are only getting worse. They were demanding to know what she's going to do about it, and she had no answers whatsoever. That's what people were thinking about. When you look and see that it says the economy was on their minds, that's what they mean. The price of groceries, gasoline, and a roof over their heads. Nobody was saying anything about, what about this plan that Kamala Harris says that she has for black men? That's something I don't like. So where's this guy getting this stupidity from? Those are the voices in his empty head that are talking. But the problem is he's not alone. These are people painting their own reality. And what you see is, if it has anything to do with black people at all, they're going to attack it. That's their impulse. Facts be damned. I mean, even black people weren't talking about Kamala Harris's so-called black male agenda plan. Even black people weren't talking about it because we knew it was a nothing burger. Everyone did. It had no basis and absolutely no influence on the outcome of the election whatsoever. Certainly not with quote-unquote people, as this guy was talking about. Now, immigration, on the other hand, was something that actually did influence this election. That was something that people were actually talking about when they voted. They mentioned it in the polls and in the exit polling. And yet this white commentator here, he doesn't mention that at all. He's telling on himself. He's got black people on the brain. That irrational fury at black people that these guys have is ever present with these undercover bigots. They can try to mask it by claiming that they're talking about economics in general. But let them talk long enough, and sooner or later they're going to say what they really believe because they want to. They don't want to have to just hold this in. At some point they want to say exactly what they think, exactly the way that they think it. Keep in mind, this channel has over 1 million subscribers, and I'll bet that not one of these people who listen to this guy knew that he was wrong about that or called him on it. This is what happens when you have pretend knowledge. As Dr. Ivan Van Sertima said, the people who claim to have the most facts usually have the least truth. This is the multi-level propaganda that the black media was created to combat. People like this guy are angry that Democrats even felt the need to offer some what he himself admitted was an unimportant policy that didn't deserve the attention that it got. And then he slips in that men are being left behind crap at the end.
Now, there is one group above all that nobody wants to recognize as falling behind, and that's working-aged men.
Now, brothers, this is why I've told you that I don't listen to nor do I condone any of that men's rights gibberish. This is and has always been nothing more than white supremacist males doing their own version of white feminist propaganda from the 60s. And whenever you talk to these white male so-called men's rights activists, they talk about black people like dogs. They sit there and do all the stuff about multiculturalism and political correctness and why can't I call you nigger and all the rest of it. Have you ever noticed that there's no incident where a black man has been harmed or killed that has ever prompted any of these so-called men's rights activists, particularly the white ones, to say, hey, look what happened to this black man over here. This is an example of how men don't have equal rights in this society or taken advantage of. They don't say that. They only reserve their outrage and their sympathy for white men. But you also have a lot of white males who may not identify as right-wingers per se. They may lean to the left on social issues more often than not. And yet when it comes to race, they also identify completely with these white men's rights types. And both of them make it a point to distinguish themselves from black men altogether. There's a lot of money and interested parties who are trying to attack our drive for what we're owed. Please don't underestimate the importance of what it is that we're doing. These anti-black racists, no matter where they are or who they work for, they obsess over us. They fixate on us. They have an unholy fixation with hating black people 24/7. We're always on their minds, especially when they claim that we're not. When we do something, they see it and they fear it. They try to pretend like they don't notice us. Like an ostrich hiding their heads in the sand, they try to pretend like they don't notice us, like we're beneath their notice. We're so insignificant, we're not even worth them saying anything. And then we look up 2 seconds later and they're blaming us for everything from the JFK assassination to the fact that it rained yesterday to them losing a presidential election. And this guy also talks about how the very victims of police violence don't want the police defunded, that it's only white liberal types on university campuses who say stuff like that. He also engages in some weapons-grade weasel words. As part of his selective cherry-picking of anecdotes, he references an Asian American commentator who claims that he was a poor student. In fact, he was so poor that he attended Yale, because every poor student goes to the second most expensive and exclusive university on the planet, don't you know?
Robert Henderson is a political commentator who popularized this term in an article he wrote about his experience as a poor student attending Yale. His wealthy classmates not only had the financial ability to be politically active, since they didn't have to be as worried about losing their jobs or missing a few days of work.
The way that this guy tries to set up his pro-police propaganda, he attempts to masquerade it as if this is going to be an argument about class. In fact, that's the word that he uses the most. Class. But of course, this wasn't about class at all, because when he actually gets to the public opinion that he wants to talk about, he immediately drops all that phony talk about class, and instead, it's about race.
He found that 73% of non-white working-class respondents supported keeping police budgets intact. However, 20% of white college grad liberals favored reducing police budgets.
Non-whites and whites and what they think about defunding the police. This is the kind of clumsy propaganda that normally is confined to 4chan and Reddit. See, there's always individuals who are trying to find a way to attack black people, but first, they have to attempt to bestow legitimacy on themselves. So they try to claim, well, we're not attacking black people because of race, we're saying that there's a class issue, don't you know? And they always try some feeble talking point saying, well, I grew up poor, so I know what it means to be black. I grew up poor. First of all, not every black person is poor. And second of all, black doesn't mean poor, but that's the way that they use it. They're showing you their racism, they're letting their bigotry show. In reality, these people in most cases only had about one parent who might have been on drugs, and yet when you look at their lives, you see that they had ready access to all kinds of advantages and social contacts, and that they were given ready admission to every arena that white privilege has to offer. Poverty is not what determines what you get or where you can go in this society. Race does. Anyone who tries to use some class-based argument is a liar and an apologist for racism. And, as I've shown you from this guy's own words, even when they try to pretend that it's not about race, they still have to admit it's about race. Notice that he doesn't bring you any examples of these tons of black people who are just so happy with the police and think that the cops are protecting the community. All these assertions that he makes without proof, and yet this guy's being promoted by YouTube's algorithm. As Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, someone wants this message out there. And if his pro-police gibberish sounds familiar, it should, because we've heard it before from people like Negro Jim Clyburn. 4 years ago, he was complaining about young black people who were saying defund the police.
I'm curious what you make of the fact of the House seats that you lost and why that happened.
That phrase, defund the police, cost Jamie Harrison tremendously.
You sound kind of mad, Congressman. It sounds like you're blaming the more progressive members of your party for holding folks accountable or to a standard that doesn't work in their district. You blame the progressive members?
No, I don't blame progressive members. I want everybody in my caucus to be as practical as I am. That's the difference here. How are you going to look at me and say I'm not progressive? This foolishness about you more progressive than I am, that's poppycock, and I'm not going to listen to it.
If you could have a caucus meeting right now and you would, or tell folks what they should do differently, given the losses that we have, what would you say to them?
Stop sloganeering. Sloganeering kills people. Sloganeering destroys movements. Stop sloganeering.
So, it wasn't the cops who were killing black people, it was slogans killing black people. Nice to know. I wonder if Jim Clyburn said that sloganeering kills people crap to the family of George Floyd, or Tamir Rice, or Breonna Taylor, or Sandra Bland, or Walter Scott, or any of the countless numbers of black people murdered by the police. Tell them it was the slogans that killed them. You just think the cops killed them. You just think the cops. It was a slogan. Stop sloganizing. Stop sloganizing. This is the level of stupidity that's been running the Democratic Party, and that's the reason why they won in 2020 despite the best efforts of Jim Clyburn, and they lost in 2024 under Jamie Harrison's brilliant leadership. He griped that that was the reason that his puppet Jamie Harrison lost the Senate election that he was running in. Well, that didn't stop Raphael Warnock from winning his Senate race, did it? Did it stop Jon Ossoff from winning his Senate race either? They had no problems winning their Senate races at all. And yet Jim Clyburn didn't see that his boy Harrison was the problem. I guess that's why after the election, Jamie Harrison was made the chair of the DNC. And we see where his leadership led the Democrats to this time around, don't we? All of those young black people who Jim Clyburn was whining about, they stayed home this presidential election. Nobody was talking about defunding the police, and nobody was talking about voting for the Democrats either. Now, we are responsible for the Democrats losing, that is true, but not for the reasons that any of these clowns have said. And this how money works guy, he clearly doesn't know how politics works. He comes off as just a low-key DNC sock puppet by and large, repeating the lines that he's been conditioned to say. In 2020, Negro Jim Clyburn was whining and blubbering about how young black people were bad for the Democrats, and this was during an election where Democrats won. They won the presidency, and then staged a come-from-behind effort to retake the Senate that was also successful. It was those same young black voters who Jim Clyburn was assailing and lambasting. They were the ones who mobilized and gave Democrats that massive victory. So understand something. Where we're concerned, all of these anti-black suck-ups, they're going to stick to the same script, regardless of if they win or lose an election. They'll say it simply because of what we're doing. The issue isn't whether or not they win an election. It's about maintaining the racial pecking order and making sure that black people understand we're never supposed to assert ourselves, not in the political or economic arenas. Black people are rarely supposed to be seen and never supposed to be heard, as they see it. Now, by the way, do these people actually want prosperity? First of all, they already have it. And secondly, they want more prosperity for themselves. But they demand that it has to be done in a way where black people don't benefit at all. That is the point that they have to reach. That's the main demand that they make. It is not enough that they merely benefit, but black people have to be harmed by the policy. The racial wealth gap is the main driver of the racial pecking order, and it must be maintained no matter what. None of these people ever points to black people and says, well, you know what? If you don't do what black people want, you're going to lose the election, even though creeps like James Carville bemoan how the shrinking black voter turnout spells doom for Democrats, and yet you don't see anybody echoing that, and even James Carville only occasionally mentions it. They'll point to any other voting bloc, however tiny, or some other constituency, however insignificant, and say that these people are why this or that election went the way that it did. They don't mention black people at all, unless they can lie about us and make it fit their narrative, which is, well, you have to ignore black voters. What black people want, that's just too politically radioactive. It's too controversial. You'll lose elections if you listen to black people at all. Black people just need to go along with whatever the general policy is, even though black people will get nothing from it. White women could have changed the results of the 2016 and 2024 elections easily, and yet Donald Trump's support among white women grew this election cycle. This is the guy who became infamous for talking about how he grabs white women by their genitals, and yet those same white women broke for him. They broke in Trump's direction and they supported him. Now, this guy calls his channel How Money Works, but given how willfully stupid and lazy he is with his research, he ought to call his channel How Illiteracy Works. He's so busy pushing his white males are victims line that he can't even be bothered to do basic research and find out if any of his assertions are actually true. But then again, part of white privilege is that there's no consequences or penalties for being wrong. Neither your reputation nor your income nor anything else takes a hit no matter how wrong you are. Scott Jennings made a royal fool of himself, and not only did he not apologize, CNN has still had him on the air as if this ignoramus had any credibility left when he got shown up live on air by a D-list part-time actor who isn't even in politics. Scott Jennings was part of the W administration. I guess that's why he's so stupid. And yet he lost an on-air debate to a part-time TV actor. Gee, it kind of makes you wonder what the hell Scott Jennings was doing when he was working in the White House. He was doing the same thing Simone Mamie Sanders was doing, burnishing his resume, making a bunch of calls to these white media outlets, trying to line up his next gig after he left the White House. Just like Simone Sanders, he too wound up on white media cable, blowing hot air for their amusement. The point of this morning's briefing is to be on the lookout for these low-key anti-black racists. See, the white media has invented a phony, largely artificial definition of what a racist is supposed to be, and it's usually someone who is so ridiculous, so idiotically open with their racism, they might as well be a cartoon character. This is deliberate. The kind of over-the-top bigot that the white media presents in their movies and TV shows as being a quote-unquote racist is a caricature, and they know it. It's someone who has racism Tourette's. They're so cartoonishly racist, this person doesn't really actually exist in real life. But that's the entire point. Hollywood invents their own custom-made definition of racist, where the bar for it is so high that practically all of these actual racists don't actually qualify for it. And that's the reason why you got people who can go to these movie theaters and watch these TV shows, and they see a quote-unquote racist, and yet they don't feel uncomfortable seeing it. They don't feel threatened by it. Hollywood did that on purpose. That way they can look at these depictions of these phony, made-up racists and say, see, I'm no racist at all, because I'm not like this guy who's screaming racial slurs and lighting crosses on fire. The actual racists, however, the ones that black people talk about, these are the people who we meet every single day. They don't use racial slurs or set crosses on fire most of the time, but they do and say whatever they can to attack black people's rights, our opportunities, our dignity, and our very lives. And these anti-black propagandists are part of that. This isn't about truth or facts with them. This is about pushing a narrative, one that is expedient to the interest of white power. Sure, this guy is wrong about his basic facts, but then again, what he says isn't meant to make sense. It's meant to push a narrative, to encourage people, and we know what he means when he says people, in order to do what they want. People like this try to brand themselves as being some sort of insiders. They try to con the gullible into thinking that he's challenging, or at the very least, he's questioning the status quo. But as I've shown you, he's not. He's actually reinforcing it. This is the reason why I usually quote Dr. Noam Chomsky, who said it's the most sophisticated form of propaganda when something presents itself as opposition, when in reality, it's actually support. This guy doesn't oppose the status quo. He's actually working to justify it and reinforce it. He gives minor, very minor, occasional lip service to the anger of the working class. But then he says black people are being singled out for special treatment. Now, when this guy tries to turn black people into some sort of scapegoat for white angst, taking the people who are the primary and majority of hate crimes victims, the majority of people who are being discriminated against and killed by the police, and you sit here and think that it's okay to say, well, these black men, they made people angry because they're being singled out for special treatment. Never mind the fact that black people have received no special treatment whatsoever. It's just common sense that the reason that people didn't want to vote for Kamala Harris wasn't because she was offering black people special treatment. It's because, as the black media documented for you in excruciating detail, Kamala Harris wasn't offering the working class anything at all. From housing policy, to immigration, to economics, to education, to healthcare, to anything. She wasn't offering anything at all to anybody. As I've said numerous times, Kamala Harris's entire problem was she thought that she was going to BS her way past the electorate with an avalanche of word salad, and it didn't work. That's the reason why she lost. And this is supposed to be what YouTube and other white media online outlets try to palm off as being some sort of informed armchair intellectual. He's an insider here. I mean, he's going to tell you how money works because he's got the inside track. He can't even tell you how polls work. 10 seconds of looking at Kamala Harris's campaign platform was apparently more work than he was willing to do. But I got a question for you, family. Do you think that maybe, just maybe, this guy already knew the way he was saying wasn't true? Sure, there's morons like Scott Jennings who are too lazy to read beyond a headline, but not all of them are that dumb. Remember, Chris Rufo himself admitted that he was deliberately lying through his teeth about critical race theory. He admitted that he was intentionally lying about it because this was part of a political strategy by the white right to demonize black people for political profit. All of it was an effort to stop things like the 1619 Project and other black advocacy that was threatening the status quo. This guy had the nerve to lie again and claim that he had no resources compared to his opponents and that he willed his phony critical race theory hysteria into being through his own infantile rantings. So you had this bloviating bigot who the white right had put millions of dollars behind to push his propaganda, who was coordinating his propaganda with crisis actors who most likely were being paid by the same white millionaires and such who were paying Rufo. These people would go to school boards with the local Fox TV affiliate in tow, and they would have video of them screaming at and threatening school board administrators, and you would have multi-billion-dollar corporations like Fox News putting Rufo on the air on a nightly basis on their highest watched shows, and of course the right-wing hate radio sphere also would give Rufo tons of airtime as much as he wanted, the kind of massive media publicity that a too-big grifter like Rufo could never buy. And yet he had the nerve to say that he didn't have any resources compared to his opponents, when the truth of the matter was he had the kind of massive resources that they didn't. I didn't see the woman who wrote the 1619 Project being given the kind of massive coverage that Rufo was. Didn't see her as a constant on any sort of radio stations. And the same thing goes for Ibrahim Kendi X, who's one of the people who Rufo wrongly tries to claim created critical race theory. These individuals didn't have any sort of massive media presence. But then again, they didn't have multi-billionaires like Rupert Murdoch or any of the people behind these right-wing think tanks who are bankrolling their efforts. Those people actually were grassroots. Rufo, on the other hand, pure astroturf. As I've said numerous times, Rufo had been a failure his entire adult life. He tried and failed to be the next Dinesh D'Souza. By that I mean he had tried to make some propaganda films and see if he could find a way to be the so-called right-wing antidote to Michael Moore, but of course the white right recognized that this guy has no talent, he's not interesting or even intelligent. And so Rufo, like Charles Murray and Douglas Murray and all the other brain-dead Murrays out there, he wound up reduced to slithering over to the Manhattan Institute begging for a job, pushing their anti-black hate speech for them. What little success Rufo's had spouting his anti-black rhetoric is literally the first taste of success that this clown's had his entire adult life. This is the only thing he's actually done with it. So he was feeling himself, and he was so desperate to tell people how brilliant he thinks he is, that in the process he repeatedly told everyone that he's been lying all along. But this shouldn't surprise you. White supremacists are terrorists, and when terrorists get caught, believe it or not, they're just likely as not to confess to all of their past terrorist actions that they've been responsible for. Why not? If you know that you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cage in some supermax prison, locked down 24 hours a day, or that you're going to be rotting out in Guantanamo, if this is the last chance you're going to get to tell your enemies how you've been getting over on them, you're going to take it. It doesn't hurt a terrorist to confess to the bombings and assassinations that they've been pulling off in the past. Why not tell your enemies, hey, we've been knocking you guys dead for years. Let me give you the rundown on how we've been getting away with murder and you didn't even know it. This is what Rufo's been doing. This is the only chance that he's ever going to get to tell all those people who said he was a total failure how smart he really thinks he is. When you're insecure, you suffer from diarrhea of the mouth. But when you're insecure and stupid, you become a racist. Now, this How Money Works character, he pretends to sympathize with the working class and the working poor, but he spends a far greater amount of time praising the likes of Elon Musk. Just understand that just like Rufo, people like this are not some anonymous entity. They claim to be, but that's not true at all. A lot of these people who post things in comment sections, or who have these YouTube channels or social media groups that get lots of subs and lots of traction and seem to get re-mentioned, and they always seem to be in the algorithm. And they also seem to have access to big resources too, but nobody ever knows where they get this money from. These people aren't some nobodies. They're not some John Q. Public with just an internet connection and some ideas. They come from careers where they bump elbows with the same racists who we contend with on TV and in print, and in many cases in the government. They work at these hedge funds and these other financial corporations who have racially stratified the economy, and then they have nimrods like this tell everyone that even talking about black people, well, that's the real problem. Now, of course, it's stupid to ask, well, what if somebody said they have a program just for white people like Scott Jennings did? If there was someone saying that we got a program just for white people, what would the response be? Well, look at Elon Musk, then look at Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Donald Trump, Joe Biden. White men have already been given total control of everything. In fact, the largest and longest standing affirmative action program in human history is white privilege. And yet you don't see the Scott Jennings or the How Money Works or any of these other bloviators sitting here saying that there's anything wrong with that. And, well, why don't we want to call out this systematized white privilege that's been going on for hundreds of years? But this is what a lot of people were watching in the aftermath of the election this year. And this is why you need the black media, because without us, these people would have no one pushing back against them. And when they spew their lies, you wouldn't be armed with the truth. Whenever any of these propagandists tries to claim that they don't have the resources of their opponents, that's a lie. Black media doesn't have the resources of white power, and yet our message resonates because we have something these well-paid propagandists will never have: the facts. And that's how truth works. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Reasonable Dude, Jimmy Whitfield, Kenneth Dickerson, Anthony Pollard, and Craig Simmons. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.